Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka the Emblem event for the Space-Time Smackdown has just started, and I've got some banger decks for you to try out, maybe test out for the tournament weekend as well. So let's get to it. I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown of the event before I get to the decks, and there will be gameplay on the side matching with these deck lists. But before we get into that, let's get to the event. So if you just head on over to the battle screen, you will be able to click the versus portion of the app, then events match, and it will take you to the Space-Time Smackdown Emblem event. Now you're going to need 45 wins to get the emblem, and you have plenty of time to do it, but it's never too late to get started. Plus, these decks are some of the top performing decks in recent tournaments, so this gives you a great chance to practice with them and potentially get ready for maybe your first event or maybe your 10th tournament coming up this week and this weekend. So if you take a look at the prizes for doing this event, you're going to get pack hourglasses, as much as, like, if you add them all together, there's 24 pack hourglasses for participating in 10 versus battles. Then you've got some shine dust for winning 50 versus battles, so it goes all the way up to 50, but the emblem is going to be capped at 45, so as long as you get to 45, you can get these new shiny emblems. Now recently, with the last 45 win streak event, I actually streamed it. It took me about 7 hours in the stream to go ahead and complete the 45 wins. So maybe that gives you an idea of how long it may or may not take you to get these games and these victories. So keep that in mind as you get closer and closer to that deadline, which I believe is the 24th. But let's get to these decks and the gameplay. The first deck that I want to show you is arguably one of the better counters to the current Darkzone deck that features Darkrai and Magnezone. This is a deck that I could have highlighted in one of my previous videos, but it's never too late to get started talking about one of the hottest decks right now that's countering some of the most popular decks out there. And just kind of running through this deck list, there is a little bit of flexibility with that potion. You could maybe make the argument it could be another leaf, but when you take a look at this deck list, the idea is to get Druddigon into the active while evolving into a Greninja and using those Pokemon communications to find the missing Greninja pieces. You've also got Darkrai, which is able to do some passive damage while it's on the bench if you can attach energies to it per turn. It's very important to note there are no water energies in this deck. This is all darkness energies. So that is something to definitely be aware of when you're creating the deck and making sure that it's running smoothly. But when you look at the math of the damage this deck can do, Darkrai swings for 80 damage, Greninja can deal 20 damage itself, and then when you attach an energy, Darkrai can do 20 damage as well. So when you add all that up together, this has a 120 damage once it gets going to the active spot. Another thing that you'll realize in this deck is the use of double Cyrus, and there is no Sabrina to be found. The reason why you're running double Cyrus as opposed to a 1-in-1 split of Sabrina and Cyrus is simply because Cyrus has such great synergy with Greninja as well as Darkrai. You know, in this meta, there's really no time nowadays with all these snipers, with, you know, and all these Pokemon like Darkrai, where you can just pressure and put damage all around the board, even with things like Spiritomb. And so that's why you're starting to see a lot of players move into things like double Cyrus, and it's very frightening for decks that are, you know, full of EXs, because, you know, gone are the days where you could soak damage, retreat out of your active, and then feel like, hey, I've got multiple Pokemon on my bench, so I can hide from Sabrina. Cyrus is pretty much doing away with that. The other thing that I look at when I see this deck is the inclusion of one leaf, and you're going to have moments where you're going to want to get that Druddigon out of the active. I think in this game that actually comes up. in a very pivotal moment where I need to draw Leaf, and I actually think this is the turn right now that you're watching, in the screen to my right. Let's see, I think this is it. But yeah, I think I top deck Leaf right here. Oh, okay, maybe not. Maybe I already had the Leaf. But anyways, I use Leaf to get out of the active, and I'm gonna be able to kind of start doing some damage as well, utilizing Cyrus here. So you can see the synergy on the screen. And one of the things that you'll also notice is Marowak is something that may start to see some play because, hey, double heads, I can knock out a lot of things in the meta. But honestly, the bigger takeaway is that there are like a lot of like fighting decks that are out with Magnezone, which I'll show you a little bit of that later on as well. But Marshadow can be a little bit of a threat as well, but with cards, like Darkrai that have 140 HP, it takes a little bit of chip damage for them to finally get to that point where they can knock out a Darkrai. The other inclusion that you may notice that's missing in this deck are any kind of Pokemon tools. And because there's no Pokemon tools, there's no way to extend the life of your Darkrai with something like a giant cape. And so that can be a little bit of an issue as well. But again, no water energy, just pure darkness energy, trying to utilize Greninja with that Cyrus technology, and then you've got that potion for when you maybe try to get out of a break point. But hey, maybe that potion is better off being a giant cape, maybe that potion is better off being a leaf. But again, all of the decks that I'm showcasing are decks that pretty much card for card have already performed very well at some of the tournaments that we've seen. I think all of these decks have either finished first or at least gotten top 4. So keep that in mind. And again, you're just trying to give yourself the best chance to get these 45 wins. It took me about 7 hours on stream to get it. I think I might have mentioned that already, but again, just kind of running through this recap of this game. There is a little bit of a shaky moment coming up where they're going to flip double heads on their Marowak EX, and that's going to be a little bit scary, but the good thing is, I'm going to be able to continue stacking damage, and it looks like I'm going to be able to hopefully get that second Greninja on the board. Also, I have Darkrai in my hand, so I can, also put that down and start chipping away. Now, I do put the Greninja in the active simply because it's going to have 1 retreat cost, and it's still going to take 2 heads for my opponent to win. But you can really start to see the damage piling up on their Marowak EX. And I'm just going to put them in a position where they have to flip double heads, or they're just straight up going to lose the game. So again, with cards like Pokemon Communication, you're starting to see a little bit more consistency out of these Stage 2 decks. And although I'm playing 10 Pokemon in this deck, I can still get a lot of value out of Pokemon Communication. And then here is kind of the end of the game here, where they're basically just putting it all on the line, needing to flip 2 heads. They only flipped 3 out of 4 heads total, so it's not able to get the job done, and they know that this game is pretty much over, and we're into the next game. So there's the concede. Okay, now this is the deck that has taken the meta on by storm, and a lot of you are very familiar with this already. It's been featured in a ton of YouTube videos, and unless you haven't checked out any content or haven't looked at any tourney results, this is probably going to be a little bit of a shock to you, right? Or it won't be a shock to you. But this deck is very straightforward, and instead of utilizing something like a Greninja, this is going to utilize Magnezone, and a card from Genetic Apex. Magneton is going to ramp itself over the span of the game. As soon as you can get it down, you're just going to start attaching energies to it every turn. Hopefully you can get to 3 electric energies. If you get to 2 electric energies, that's still pretty decent. You still should have time to move it in and do some pretty nice damage with it. The other synergy with this deck is going to come from the Darkrai and the Druddigon. And basically the role of Darkrai and Druddigon is to either chip damage or stall, right? So Druddigon is going to take the stalling portion of a lot of the games that you're going to be playing, and then Darkrai is going to have that passive damage like you see with the other decks that are including Darkrai. A couple of things to point out with the trainer lineup, and this is where my version slightly differs from some of the other versions, some people are playing one Cyrus. I think that it's really good to just play two. And some people are also playing Rocky Helmet as opposed to Giant Cape. And that's a little bit interesting as well, because they're basically taking more chip damage with Rocky Helmet, whereas I'm just saying, hey, I want to extend the shelf life of my Darkrai EX. The other points to bring up with the trainer lineup would be the Leaf and the Pokemon Communication. Pokemon Communication can be a little iffy whenever you're playing this many Pokemon, but 10 Pokemon is probably still solid, as you saw with the other Greninja and Darkrai deck. But with the one communications, you can't necessarily force yourself to always get one Pokemon, but there are going to be times where you have like a 66% chance to get the Pokemon that you want, or hopefully at least a 50% chance to get the Pokemon you want, and that's going to be really helpful. The one leaf is also a pretty big topic of discussion, because you can make the argument that two leaves help you pivot out of that wall, so that way you don't get stuck taking on something like an Electabuzz for Mythical Island, where it's just able to start sniping things. And in this game, you can kind of start to see that side effect, right? You can see, if you look at their bench, they've got that Mythical Island Electabuzz, and if they can get 2 energy on it, it puts me in a weird spot where I either have to evolve to Magnezone very quickly, or I have to basically know that, hey, my Darkrai is going to come in with a lot less HP than I really want it to. And in this game, I think my opponent's going to decide to put the attack damage on my Darkrai. And hey, that's debatable, right? Like, if that's correct. But again, with cards like Hitmonlee that are starting to see more play, with cards like Electabuzz, with cards like Zebstrika that may start to see more play, as well as people start to realize that we are in a little bit of a Druddigon stall era again, you might start to see these sniping Pokemon put pressure on cards like Magneton and force you to evolve maybe a turn earlier than you really want to. And now your Magnezone is not able to deal, more than 110 damage, which is still good, don't get me wrong, but it may only be able to attack one time. And when you take a look at the Giant Capes, I think that you can really see why the Giant Capes are good in this kind of matchup. If you're playing a Darkzone mirror match, your Darkrai having 170 HP as opposed, or excuse me, 160 HP as opposed to 140 can be the difference in you sticking around one more turn to finish something off. And you'll see that come up in this game as well. But I try to hold on to my Giant Capes until I know that, hey, it's going to go on a Pokemon that I know is going to stay on the board maybe a turn longer than my opponent wanted it to. And also, if I notice that, hey, this card or this deck may have room for something like a red card, I may put it down a little bit earlier. But right here, you're seeing the only reason why my Darkrai is surviving that attack is because of that Giant Cape. And if that had been a Rocky Helmet, this game maybe would have gotten a little bit hairy. I guess the argument you could make is, hey, they would have been at 100 HP on their Magnezone. You would have switched in your Magnezone and still dealt 110 HP. But the big thing that I look at here is that I've denied the prize, right? Like, I denied the prize, and I know that I still have Cyrus left in my deck to bring that Magnezone back out, and they really they're still not able to take a firm grasp of this game. Now the Pachirisu comes in here, and the Pachirisu does have a tool as well as the correct amount of energy that is going to help it attack this turn. But again, all I need is Cyrus. Honestly, there's a lot of outs that I have right here. Even though that Pachirisu is pretty thick, I end up top decking the Cyrus here, and that clinches the game. So again, very strong deck. Hopefully this video helps you kind of see some gameplay and prepare how to play the deck a little bit better. The next deck that I want to highlight is the popular Palkia Vaporeon deck. Now there's other variants that you can play of this deck. You can definitely play Articuno technology in this deck to also increase how punishing that first turn Misty can be. In this version, I decided to kind of not do that. I just went with one of the first or second place finishes of the water decks, and this is the list that I ended up playing for you guys. The other thing that I would point out in this highlight here is that I super high rolled with Misty, I'm not going to lie to you, and that definitely helped me secure this victory. When you take a look at the cards in this deck, it's utilizing the Vaporeon for Mythical Island to generate, or excuse me, to manipulate energies and move them around. It's got the Manaphy to turbo your Palkia or your Eevee, because again, Manaphy does not discriminate which Pokemon it can attach energies to. The Double Leaf to help you pivot out of the active, very easy. Double Misty, because Misty just is a high roll card that water decks can probably play if they have like expensive attacks like Palkia or Articuno. Double Cyrus, which again is something that I definitely think is the new move. And you also have some good synergy with your Palkia big nuke attack, where maybe they try to go ahead and absorb 30 damage, and then they go ahead and go to the bench while you're able to Cyrus things back out. The double Pokeball is pretty self-explanatory, and then Giant Cape to try to stay out of some breakpoints with your Palkia. You know, obviously cards like Gyarados still exist. Cards like Mewtwo are definitely seeing less play, but it is good to try to respect those breakpoints, especially maybe something like an Infernape. You know, you don't want to lose to an Infernape Giovanni, so Palkia does like seeing those capes get put on it. And when you take a look at the gameplay to the right side of the video, that Misty high roll is in full effect. The tricky part about this game is that even though I do have that Misty high roll, I'm back to where I started with, you know, pretty low energy counts. However, they are not going to have a lot of pressure that they can kind of return back. You know, the best that they can do is kind of set up another Marshadow. And again, the bulky part of the deck having such high HP when you talk about Palkia and Vaporeon really helps in this matchup. They're going to have a hard time one-shotting things, and so you can imagine that their deck is probably playing Cyrus as well. But I'm able to Misty again, and I get pretty lucky there, which again is a dynamic with this deck that you have to respect. And so now I'm basically one turn away from pretty much sealing this game, because I can just hit for 30, and then whatever they put in, I can basically nuke it with that big bad attack for 4 energy. So again, pretty straightforward game. You're not always going to high roll. Sometimes the games are going to get really grindy, where you have to kind of send Manaphy back in. You have to ramp, and then you have to retreat the Manaphy, or basically sacrifice the Manaphy. But there's pretty much no way that I can lose this game looking at the current game board situation, and a lot of that is going to be due to Misty. So you can't look at this deck and say that it's not good because it relies on Misty, because it does have Manaphy as well. It's the combination of having Manaphy or Misty that really makes this deck really solid. And hey, it's pretty bulky, so you really can't discount it, but this could be a deck that, you know, hey, maybe you've only pulled Palkias, and, you know, you haven't pulled a lot of the Darkrai's that you may need. This is a good substitute that you can run as well. The last deck, and arguably the spiciest of these decks, you are looking at one of the hottest decks that has come out like the past 48 hours, okay, depending on when you watch this. So basically, people decided to take that Fighting Toolbox shell and combine it with the Magnezone shell. And I will be really quick to point out that this does not play electric energy, just in case, you know, you were wondering. It's strictly fighting energy. But this is basically combining that early tempo with Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, putting pressure to your opponent's active or bench, so that way you can kind of chip them into one-shot range with either Marshadow Revenge KO or Magnezone's 110 damage. The other cool thing about this deck is it's all one prizers, so you don't mind trading a one knockout for, you know, an EX basically, because you know that you can come out ahead in that race. The other cool thing about this deck is that this is something that is a nice direct counter to some of the things that we're starting to see in the meta. That is why this deck has sprung up. The early tempo of Hitmonchan can make people pretty uncomfortable, especially if they're playing things like that 18 trainer Pachirisu or maybe even that Pikachu deck, unless they go first. If they go first, then all bets are off. But just kind of taking a look at the deck list, you're playing that double Cyrus because it has fantastic synergy with Hitmonlee, and also if you're only able to chip things with Hitmonchan or Marshadow, you're not able to finish them off, Cyrus comes in and cleans up the rest of the job. There is one Pokemon communication in this deck, and that's debatable. Maybe you could make that another card, but I do like what Pokemon communication does, especially when you start getting to a point in the game where your deck is down to 7-8 cards, and now you're pretty much at 50% or higher to get the card that you need. Maybe it's a Magnezone, maybe it's the second Magneton, maybe it's the first Magneton. But again, you're charging up energies on that Magneton, hoping to get to that Magnezone whenever you need it, and then you're going to pivot into that Magnezone. You're going to knock out something powerful just like I just did and take home the W. All in all, I hope you guys enjoy these 4 different decks that are all very high level, competitive, and you can take them to this emblem event and I guarantee you'll have some great results. I'll end on this. You can get 45 wins with any deck on the ladder. Let's just be honest. But if you want to get there in a quick way, or if you really want to get ready and prepare yourself for maybe a tournament run, I do think it is really helpful to have, videos like this that showcase the decks and how powerful they are. And maybe you can take those decks, maybe add your own flavor to it and have some really nice success. But as always, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day for me to be background noise. Maybe you learned something, or maybe it was just entertainment. And until next time, I'll catch you later. Peace.